Hello and welcome. My name is Jackie Kiger, and I'm a full-time faculty member here at the University of Arizona's Global Campus. I'm going to be your host for the panel, Keeping It Real and Relevant Perspectives on Cultural Awareness and Competence in Online Course Instruction. Our session panelists today are Doctors Yolanda Harper, John Bathke, Avisha Sadiginejad, Stephanie Anderson, and welcome, doctors. Thank you for being here. Audience members, by joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC related materials. Your microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat. Also, we've enabled the live transcription. So if you'd like to use that, click the live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom window now. I would ask that you have your chat window open to type your questions as you listen along and sit back and enjoy. Panelists, the floor and microphone and ability to share your screen is yours. Welcome, panelists.
Thank you so much. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Yolanda Harper, and I'm chairing this panel. I am professor in the College of Arts and Sciences. I've been with UAGC/Ashford since 2013, and I'm excited about the presenters that have shared their expertise in this panel this morning. I would like each of you to quickly introduce yourself. And of course, you can find their full bios on the TLC website, and we can just take them in the order on the screen. Teresa does send her regrets. She's not able to join us, but her presentation was recorded. So if you haven't viewed it, please do so. Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm Stephanie Anderson. I'm an associate professor in the College of Arts and Sciences.
Thank you, Stephanie. John?
Hi, John Bathke. I'm core faculty in the Masters of Organizational Management program in the Forbes School of Business and Technology.
Thank you, John. And Avisha.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Avisha Sadiginejad. I am the lead faculty and associate professor for the marketing and e-marketing programs at the Forbes School of Business and Technology.
Thank you, Avisha. So I hope you all were able to view all of our panelist sessions. If not, of course, they were recorded and will be available for viewing even after the conference ends. So I'm going to stop sharing and just say a couple of words, and then we'll get right into the questions. The sessions in this particular panel were strategically focused on practical strategies to demonstrate cultural awareness and competency in our online instruction, while we're also preparing students to develop and enhance their own global and cultural competencies. So this particular panel was not focused on course development, but John has a wonderful panel that you can catch tomorrow. Today, we're focusing on what we're actually doing in the online classrooms as they are taught. So without further ado, let's get started with the questions. We'll begin with again, a predetermined set of questions. Do feel free to add your own questions in the chat. We should have some time to address those questions that you pose as well. The first question I have is for each panelist, and we'll just take you in the same order that you introduced yourselves. The question is, cultural competency includes a continuous process of being open to examining our own identities, our biases, and experiences that impact our perceptions of others, as well as our interactions with those that are perceived similar to and different from us in some ways that are salient. So what do you do to challenge yourself to reveal and address biases and increase your own self-awareness in order to elevate your own levels of cultural competency with our diverse students?
So I believe that starts with me. And one of the things that I like to do is to purposefully expose myself to different beliefs. And that can come through reading or through exposure to different media sources that I might not otherwise be interested in viewing. And it can be really uncomfortable, honestly. But I find that my natural reaction, and I would expect that it's probably true for many of us, when I encounter something that's contrary to my own perspective, is defensiveness or frustration. And when I feel that, then I realize that that's an opportunity for me to learn and grow. And so I try to withhold my tendency to attribute motives or to make judgments, and instead seek information that might help me understand where a person is coming from and how they could get to that outcome logically. And that really helps me simmer down a little bit and react in a more appropriate way, and in the end learn something.
Thank you, Stephanie. And John, same question.
Yes, I think, one of the roots, or one way to approach cultural competency is to really engage from an instructor, professional perspective, critical self-reflection, and essentially, examining our own biases. How do we view both the students and also the subject matter that we're teaching? And so it's, I think, an important process. And Stephanie, offers a great suggestion of, about, engaging literature that at times maybe we find challenging. One specific way that we can kind of maybe find our biases is Harvard has this website called Project. I have it. I'll put it in the chat, but it basically Project Biases. Or no, I forget the name right now. Please excuse me. But it is a tool that we can use to examine, our different types of biases, whether it's racial, gender-based, sexual orientation-based, and what have you. And it allows, us to, do a few questions, and it kind of gives us a chance to reflect. And I think that's very healthy. One way I think that is also healthy is to be aware of the composition of the courses within your program. We all should be doing program reviews, and those specifically look at a lot of our demographics within our programs in terms of racial demographics, gender. Those are the main ones that come off the top of my head. But I think being aware of that and how we feel about that, I think, is a very important starting place in terms of self-reflection within our courses and how we approach teaching our courses within our programs.
Great, thank you, John. And Avisha, same question.
Sure. So my interest to learn more about perceptional biases and self-awareness and self-critic really started 6 years ago with the rest phenomena. I don't know if any one of you remember that. Let me just put a quick link to it. Remember, there was, it was so viral. I think most of the entire globe saw it. It was a debate between the color of that dress. Either it's golden white or blue and black. And I remember I had this conversation in my family and then my friends, and then everybody was talking about it. How come one dress can be seen in two different ways? And with that, I kind of felt that is so interesting, like how we perceive things differently while looking at the same exact thing. And I started to read more about perception formation and just self-evaluation and self-critic. And what I learned throughout these 5-6 years since then, I realized that it is a lifelong commitment we have as instructors, even as individuals in our community. We need to be constantly mindful of our biases, the lenses that through which we see the world. And we also remember that not only we have these lenses of our, whatever culture we grew up with, everybody else has also these lenses. So when there is something that we don't agree upon, when there is something that it is hard for us to accept or believe, like the dress color, there should always be an explanation. So let's talk, let's ask questions, let's stay respectful, and at the same time be curious what are the reasons behind this. And I started to incorporate this kind of thinking, this kind of philosophy in my course development, as well as when I am in my classrooms and I give feedback to my students, or I participate in discussion forums. I always want them to somehow practice this uncomfortness, this being uncomfortable with other ideas. As Stephanie said, you certainly will feel uncomfortable when something is not confirming with your own beliefs. For example, I ask my students in peer responses, pick those peers who said something opposite to your ideas or different than your perspective, and try to understand it first, and then provide some answers or some explanation to that. So, or identify and challenge hidden assumptions in a scenario. It helps students to see it from different things, and when they read their peers' response, they say, oh, it can be seen from this perspective. So just they become more exposed to different perspectives. And I think as we go on, it becomes easier and more comfortable, and we become more recipients of other cultures and other people's biases.
Wonderful. Thank you, Avisha. And we're going to stay with you for our next question. In your presentation, you spoke to the importance of avoiding collective responses. Please share with us what you mean by that in an example from one of your classes.
Sure, I would be glad to. Yes, again, when I was reading about and learning about perception formation, I understood that our mind is wired in a way that makes clusters and put everything in clusters so that it can quickly process information, because we're bombarded with so many information in every second. So this is one way of survival for our brain to act and process. So in one way, this is really good, this is really helpful, but in another way, if we are not aware of it, we start to collectively respond to that cluster. We start to create stereotypes, and that can lead us to prejudices. So what we should know is that we should be aware of the way our minds work, and if necessary, avoid doing that and become out of that label mode. Okay, these are like, this student is always late, so she's not good. She is not, she's not going to be successful. So I'm going to be harsher when I grade her assignment. These are things that you don't say to yourself. You may not even be conscious that you're thinking of that, but you may do that actually, unconsciously when grading things. Say, okay, she's not good, so just, skip through, reading and just give her, or deduct her points. So I think that is very important, that first to become aware. And one way that I help my students to practice to come out of that label mode and just try to really focus in one mode is using the 6 thinking hats by Edward de Bono. And, in some exercises, I ask them, okay, the 6 thinking hats, for those who don't know about it, we have 6 color of hats. And like blue hat is a thinking hat, green hat is the intuition hat, red hat is the feeling hat. So when you put on your blue hat, you only have to think about the processes and nothing else. You cannot criticize the problem. You cannot add assumptions. You just need to stay in that mode for the time that you have that hat on. And it just helps them practice, staying within boundaries, thinking, and become more aware of how we can switch from one role in our mind to the other role. And that also would be a good segue for, okay, when I encounter someone, don't stereotype right away. Just try to see her or see him individually and ask questions, and don't provide a labeled response when you think you are doing that. Just hold yourself.
Thank you so much. Next question is for John. In your presentation, you spoke to the importance of being willing to adapt to diversity. What does that willingness look like on the part of an instructor, and how can instructors facilitate the development of that willingness in their students?
Thank you. I think one of the starting places that we, as an instructor, in terms of embracing diversity, is obviously to be aware of that. Again, I kind of alluded to looking at the diversity within our programs, looking at our program review and the demographic breakdowns. I think it's also good to be aware of the diversity nationally, that the population is increasingly becoming people of color. Is going to be, by some predict, by 2045, people of color majority population. But then also we can look at the demographics with our own university, and how the demographic composition of the students that we're teaching generally are. Now, of course, there's going to be diversity can mean many things to many people, and there are different types of diversity. Of course, we start with race, and maybe go to gender and LGBTQ identity, and maybe geographic issues, as well as ability related. And the list can go on and on. And each of those identities are meaningful to everyone, to all of us. And I think we need to be aware of that. One thing, though, I think that is good is for us, both in all of our roles in education, not just as professors here at UAGC, is to go back to look at the Equity for Excellence statement that was put out this last year. And I think it kind of frames us in terms of how maybe we can approach diversity. And I'll put it in the chat, but the main point that in terms of the statement that I wanted to look at is that our commitment is to champion the inclusivity of thought, belief, and the choice of all populations, intentionally including the marginalized and underserved as an integral part of our mission to provide a broader and deeper educational experience. And so I think, we need to consciously, as professors, strive to, address the needs of our disenfranchised and marginalized students. I think that's really at the core of cultural competence. And the more that we can, engage in that, one tool that I think is very helpful is asking challenging questions. And I know it's very general, but maybe specifically, if we can examine some of the social issues that are implicit in all of our respective disciplines. We have, each of our disciplines has a history, and there are social issues embedded in each one of them. And so I think that if we can, as professors, examine those social issues, and then create and craft carefully created questions for the students that engage in those social issues, I think that can help the students themselves engage in issues of diversity and what it means to learn in a diverse environment, and then eventually work in a diverse environment, because that too is going to be an important skill set that our students are going to need to have when they graduate from here. But and then one a specific way, of course, that it's kind of very obvious, is use the introductory forum to really get to know our students, and embrace the students that maybe we're not used to. They're like, specifically, I might have issues with certain geographic areas, and I won't say which ones are which, but maybe I could go out of my way to get to know those students a little better, or to try and find a way to connect with them. And part of this process is rehumanizing our interactions with our students. So I think these the posing challenging questions, but using the introductory forum, I think, are some good ways in terms of addressing diversity, but also promoting those practices within our students. And ultimately, if whatever we can do to address the needs of our disenfranchised communities, I think is going to help our population as a whole.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Stephanie, in your presentation, you spoke about how independence and interdependence can be utilized to explain various cultural divides. Using this continuum as a model, give us some examples of how that shapes ways that you interact with students in your class.
Thank you for the question. And I actually want to kind of extend what John was saying in terms of that introductory forum, and really taking the time to read carefully and pick up on many of the cues that students are giving us about things that are important to them, elements of their identity that really matter. I think that, we're so accustomed to thinking about diversity as being one thing or two things, and very specific things. And we miss some of these other ways of being diverse, differences in independence and interdependence, that I think can explain a lot of differences that we see in terms of actions. But if we're paying close attention to the kinds of things that students are saying and the way they're describing themselves and their lives, I think that really helps me specifically and practically in the classroom give examples that are going to relate to them and their lives where they're at. So if I'm just giving a blanket example to everybody about emotions or something like that, and describing some research that's out there, it might hit home for some students, and for others it might seem really not that obvious, or why would that even be the case? That doesn't make sense to me in my world and the way that things happen and the kinds of things that I see going on. And so I try to be really aware of where students are coming from and tailor my examples to things that would be meaningful and fit their expressed worldviews. And then also going beyond that, things that both Avisha and John have said, challenging them. So when a student says, well, this is XYZ, okay, why? Let's take it a step further and dig a little bit deeper. And let's look at independence and interdependence. And then I can bring in an example from the research that maybe illustrates something contrary to what they would have expected or what they've seen, and challenge them to think about how those results could have come about. What kinds of things might be different in the realities of the participants in the study that would lead to that kind of a result. So really just being very aware and appreciative of the kinds of differences that our students are bringing with them to the classroom, building on those differences and helping them see that those uniquenesses in terms of where they're from in the country, their geographic region, or their religious background, or their family situation, all of those things can be considered in a way a cultural pattern, and can lead to diverse outcomes in terms of their thinking, feeling, and action that has been studied in the literature, and give them that basis to understand and interpret some of the things that they see that they maybe don't recognize as important or meaningful, but helping them find a way to think about it on a deeper level. So thank you.
Thank you. John, can you give us an example of an interaction with a student in which you had to address an issue or situation that arose due to cultural difference between or among students?
Well, I've had a few times where, I've had a student, specifically in the discussion forums, that although, we have a set of questions, sometimes they share a lot of their personal views. And I've had a few times where the students have shared very, politically charged statements and beliefs, and, very polarizing. And, to a certain extent, of course, we're not here to tell necessarily people how to believe what they believe. Everyone's entitled to their thoughts. But I think at the same time, part of cultural competence is to be not only, maybe critical with ourselves, but offer some critical thinking skills and teach those to our students. And so in, some of these instances, instead of saying, that, don't say this or that, I think one thing that I did, hopefully it worked well, was basically, acknowledge the student's statement, but maybe restate it to the student, to the class, and say, it sounds like you're saying, X, Y, and Z, and, which is fine on the surface, but the implications of, your statement may, affect someone else, or may sound like you're saying this to this community. And is that what you're saying? And I think, that when we can kind of maybe break it down, instead of maybe reacting emotionally, but just kind of challenge the assumptions, not challenge, but examine the assumptions and basis of the statements of these, challenging statements, I think is a good way to open dialogue and discussion for students without necessarily putting that student in a bad spot. If we can look at it from these situations, in how we can examine things from a critical thinking perspective, I think can be very helpful, and a way to kind of get around the polarizing aspect of what people are saying. But the more that we can encourage the students, maybe to factually back up a lot of their statements instead of reacting emotionally or politically, I think the more sound our discussions can be. But I think that rephrasing and restating the statements so that see how that might implicate students, other communities, specifically how that might implicate communities, disenfranchised communities, I think can be a good way to promote healthy discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And I like that because it builds in not only the critical thinking, but the opportunity for increased empathy as well. I know when students sometimes share things from a perspective that may be offensive to others, or sometimes we do have students that based on their social settings, we know labels change frequently and constantly. And so maybe using labels that are no longer considered respectful. And so I will lead with, well, I'm sure you didn't mean any disrespect. You might want to do some research on XYZ, and I'll here's some links to start with. Feel free to share any information that you've heard or that you encounter. We'd love to learn from you as well.
Yeah, I think in those specific cases, yeah, it's safe to maybe email the student and just say that, just my own observation, that may be an outdated term. Here's some articles that kind of discuss that. You may want to consider, rephrasing how you address like whatever you're saying. And so, yeah, I think that's, obviously not to spill it out in a whole discussion, but maybe like an email that might be helpful to the student.
I spill it out because I don't know who else in the room has seen it in the discussion forum, but that's why I lead with, I know you didn't mean any disrespect. And one example was a student, but there's some things I do email. So it depends on how sensitive the topic is. But one I shared was when a student was using Oriental to refer to human beings. So that was one that I felt like I should put out there in the discussion forum. Some students will still use homosexual. And I just said, what kind of FYI? If you might want to look at the terms recommended on the GLAD website, for example. And again, always leading with, I know you didn't mean any disrespect. And then I will model too, because some of the references, depending on when they were written, might still use some of the outdated language, even in the title. And so I'll insert, the bracket and italics, SIC, to say, that's just exactly as the author wrote it, but acknowledging, we may not use that term today, or not everyone would find that term. Eskimo is another one that I've had students use. So, things like that. Well, thank you all. Wonderful responses. We've answered all the questions on our list. Ted, Jackie has a comment here, leading with kindness and being transparent. Absolutely. I think that is so important. Ted asked a question earlier about our thoughts on collaborative learning in respect to trying to accomplish some of these goals we've talk about. And I definitely think collaborative learning can be helpful. It does, at best, it works best when we can be engaged and kind of know what's going on. I know some professors set ground rules to help that. And then, of course, it depends on what they're working on. So some topics and some assignments have almost no overt potential charge, and others might have a lot more. When they don't have a lot of overt charge, then a lot of times you just bump into maybe cultural, stylistic differences, the interdependence, independence, continuum, like Stephanie mentioned earlier. But yeah, does anyone else want to speak on collaborative learning? Well, I scan the chat, see if there are any new questions.
Yolanda, in this moment of collaborative gathering, I just want to remind everybody, as we've listened to a wonderful exchange, that also in the chat, be mindful, there's been some great resources left for everybody. I know John shared the Harvard project about Project Implicit. So if you didn't snag that, you want to do that. And Avisha shared the Slate website, which gives you a little more information on the whole dress and perceptions. You might find that interesting as well. She shared some mind tools. And then also John shared the university's diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. So in case you missed any of those, scroll up and grab them all. That'd be my recommendation.
Can I jump really quick and add something that when I want to include some activities in my classroom just to help students, learn skill, I do it myself several times, that activity, and try to think with different perspectives to see how this activity also helps me and teaches me something that I didn't know before. And I also said in my presentation earlier, but this resource that I put in the chat area from the University of Houston has a lot of good resources. If you want to use it, it has media, it has case studies, it has some sort of games and activities that we can use just to start helping our students practicing cultural awareness and cultural competence. So that was one thing. And regarding critical thinking that John mentioned, I just wanted to say that one way that I help my students practice critical thinking is I ask them to play devil's advocate and just see the other side of the issue. And sometimes they find it really difficult. They cannot think of anything else other than what their mind is at. But just help them practice, just give them some clues, just walk them through the ways that they can see things differently. They will have, some of them will have some aha moments that, wow, this is so interesting. Again, the dress example is very interesting. Sometimes I use it in my classrooms and it attracts a lot of interest and people, because it is so tangible for so many that happened to them. So you can use that and explain how our perception affects the way we judge things and things that, there shouldn't be a fight over it. It's just difference. And also, the other thing is role playing. I think if you put a scenario in your course and ask the students to take on different roles, assume themselves in that role, and respond to that scenario from that role, it helps them again come out of that, that mode that they're always in and think from other perspectives.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, I did pose a question that anyone can answer. Our panelists, several of our panelists touched on this one in terms of what you do to encourage students to reveal and address their biases and increase their self-awareness. If any of the other members have something like this to share, please do so in the chat. Again, this is your last call for questions. I want to thank our panelists. If you haven't seen their presentations, I do invite you to go to review the recordings. I think John's recording is already up, and the other ones that were presented live will be up shortly based on the schedule of the TLC staff. But thank you all, and have a wonderful day. We'll see you at the next session. Thank you, Jackie, for your oversight of the session as well.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Drs. Yolanda, John Bafty, Avisha Shadaginishad, and Stephanie Anderson. And thank you to the audience for your participation in today's session. We encourage you to attend today's keynote presentation, which is at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where Dr. Karen Sibley will be speaking on the topic of serving students, transforming society. Now, Dr. Sibley is Emeritus Dean, School of Professional Studies, and VP of Strategic Initiatives at Brown University. We look forward to you attending that. We thank you for being here today with us, and enjoy the rest of your TLC conference. Thank you.